cuando ella diga.
Ya está. Hi, Nina. Nice to meet you. I want to introduce you, and hi, Melina. Thank you for being here once again, and Nina for the first time, and I hope not the last one. I want to introduce you. Well, Nina is a very well-known astrologer, someone that we admire a lot, and it is really an honor to have you here in this channel. So the first thing is that we would like you, to introduce yourself. No better than you to say what you do, and then we can start. We have the intention to have this video speaking about magic, astrological magic. That's something that is really, really, well, Nina has been my teacher in magic, so it's something that works, and something that is not like, oh, you do magic, you have certain rules and a lot of things. That's why Nina is going to tell us about this. So Nina, please.
All right. Thank you very much, Priscilla. It is my pleasure and honor to be invited. So thank you. So yeah, my background is primarily in traditional astrology. And my first sort of official astrological teacher was about 20 years ago now, John Frawley, who, if you do horary astrology, especially, you may be familiar with his name. I know you, of course, would know, both of you, because you do a horary, but your audience as well. However, when I finished his horary course, but I kept being very interested in traditional astrology in different forms, and so it includes, for example, electional astrology and the astrology of political events known as mundane astrology. And in the process, I discovered astrological magic, which is a very ancient sort of astrological branch or use of astrology that for a long time kind of fell out of favor, partly because of maybe religious pressures, by the church, but also, it's a very specialized field. And so just there weren't very many people to pass it on. But in the last, I would say 20 years or so, there has been a real renaissance. And it's been something that I've been studying more and more. More texts have been translated. And so we had more sources to work with as well. So my interest in astrological magic originates almost to the same period of my interest in traditional astrology of about, around the year 2000 or around there. And since then, I've been doing a lot with horary astrology as well, the art of astrological, answering questions for the audience members who may not be familiar. But today we'll talk about primarily astrological magic, and we may touch maybe on some of these other fields as well.
Great, thank you.
It's interesting that you mentioned that you were like the magic as a branch of astrology, right? Was kind of, I don't know, in a shadow period, yes, but the tradition of making talismans and like applying magic to objects, right, or applying astrological principles to objects to load them with power or with intentions or what have you, is something that was alive, right, in the Arabic world or in other traditions. So for me, it's important to say this, because if not, it looks as if we are rediscovering something that was completely lost, and maybe it was lost, but for the Western world, right? Not for like it continued to be highly used, no, in other places. I mean,
Yeah, that's a great point, Melina. And I should say, whatever I refer to, I'm thinking of Western traditional astrology. But for example, in India or in the Arabic world, it's a very different story. So that's right. That's an important point. Yeah.
And I like the thing that is the way that you can negotiate with the sky, the stars, like going through the same vibrational frequency, you can obtain certain things, no? So
yes.
What attracted you to magic?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to say, Priscilla. I think lots of people are attracted to it because it seems like it's such a great thing, like you just do this thing and suddenly you will get what you want. And I think that's why a lot of people start getting interested in magic, because it seems like it's such an easy answer to one's desires, right? And so I would be lying if I said it was something really different, but I thought, wow, this is so great. I can really use this to change my life. And however, at the same time, I like the idea that there was information or knowledge here that was very obscure. I've always been very drawn to, you know, digging around in old texts that like 3 people have, and this idea that there is information that is not available to everyone unless you know to look for it, unless you're motivated enough to try to research it. And so combined with my interest in astrology, I thought, what a great way to try to reverse engineer an astrological moment, you know, like the perfect horary question, right? Like elect the perfect moment, and then see if you could somehow use it to transform the physical world.
Okay, so can you tell us what is magic and astrology?
And
Right?
only a second. I can say that being with your magic group and taking your classes, I made a talisman, a Jupiter talisman, when Jupiter was in Sagittarius, and it worked so well. I love that talisman. So it's incredible. I can say it in first person that that talisman worked, and wow.
That's why I wanted to say, to talk about like the continuum of a tradition, right? Of things that work, right? So imagine we don't know anything about magic and we want to get started with it, right? What are we going to get and what are we going to do when we combine magic and astrology, right? Like magic 101.
Yes, I will try to summarize it in a few sentences. So basically, the way that the basic technique is this. It's just like electional astrology. So let's say that, I'll give you an example. It's probably best to work with an example. So let's talk about Priscilla's Jupiter and Sagittarius talisman as an example. So let's say that you decide that you need more good fortune in your life. And so in order to do this, to correctly select the right moment, you have to have an understanding of the symbolism of the planets, right? So the good fortune, of course, you want could be specific. Maybe you want better health, maybe you want more money, maybe, you know, it could be a lot of different things, right? But let's say that you want something fairly specific. Let's say you want, you know, more money. Well, you have to look at the different planets and first decide which of the planets is going to be the best for obtaining this. For example, you would not use the planet Mars necessarily for money because he is the god of war, right? He brings about separation and all that. No, you would probably choose Jupiter. You know, traditionally, he is the planet of wealth. And even here, you already have a difference with certain modern techniques, which say that, oh, Venus is the planet of money. Well, traditionally, it's Jupiter, right? So right there, you're already having to make some decisions. And your decisions will depend on, you know, what your astrological background is. So then you find a moment when Jupiter is very powerful. And this is a very traditional concept. In modern astrology, you know, we tended not to really emphasize, oh, Jupiter in this sign is good or that sign. You know, it might have different qualities, but it's not really, you know, it's not better or worse. Whereas in traditional astrology, it's much harsher. It's like Jupiter in Sagittarius in its own sign is good. In Capricorn, in his fall, he's bad, right? Or at least he's not helpful. So again, you have to say, okay, well, I need Jupiter in, say, Sagittarius in his own sign, or Pisces, his other sign that he rules. You could also have Sagittarius in Cancer, where he is exalted. Now, as you know, Jupiter takes a long time to pass through the signs. So you might have to wait a long time for Jupiter to be in a sign that's auspicious. Luckily, Priscilla was taking my class at a time when Jupiter was in Sagittarius, so that made it pretty easy to do your homework and find a good election. And so then you would find a moment when Jupiter was in Sagittarius, so he cannot be retrograde, right? One of the qualities weak, because he's weaker then. He cannot be combust, which means he's within 8.5 degrees of the sun, because combustion is considered traditionally harmful to a planet. You wouldn't want him making like a hard aspect to Mars or Saturn, the malefic planets, right? And you would want him somewhere in the chart where he's very powerfully placed. And traditionally, that would be either conjoining the ascendant or conjoining the midheaven. Okay, so that's not so bad. But then, and this is the part that really people tend to have problems with, you also have to look at things like the moon in the chart and make sure it's not doing anything bad and it's kind of supportive of your goal, right? So there are many factors that you have to take into consideration. And I won't go through all of them here because it's too, tedious, but nonetheless, that's really part of the learning, is you have to start to understand what to eliminate from your consideration. So you find the time when Jupiter is behaving himself and the moon is behaving herself, and there are no other problems with a chart. And for that moment, which might be a pretty short time window, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, you can then you have several options, right? For that moment, you can do a ritual, by which I mean you can do like a recitation to Jupiter, and you can use, Jupiter, for example, colored candles and incense that's made out of the materials associated with Jupiter, things like that, right? And then you can also, if you want to go kind of the extra mile, you can dress like Jupiter, in the colors of Jupiter, which would be, say, purple or sea green traditionally. You could really like make this very involved, right?
I did everything.
I believe it. Priscilla is very committed, and
that's why it works so well.
And so, yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And during this period, you can produce a physical talisman out of a material of Jupiter, right? And Jupiter rules things like yellow sapphire. He also rules tin, like the metal tin. You could even make it out of paper, and we'll talk about maybe different materials for the talismans later. Or you could even make no physical talisman at all. You could just do a verbal prayer for what you desire. And this is great if you have like a very specific one-time goal that you want to accomplish, right? So this is essentially the process of astrological magic. It can be as complicated or as simple as you want, but it always has to align with these traditional astrological principles of planetary rulership.
So you first have to have knowledge or a basis of electional astrology, and on top of that, you perform this ritual and you take it to the extent that you wish to take it, right?
That's right.
So what about the materials, right? It's very, for me, the thing that is more, like, yes, the most mesmerizing part of this, no, is the thing about like trying to capture this essence of the moment, right? It's not only the planet, but the moment in some object, right? Or some material. What are the differences? Because, for example, for me, according to my understanding or according to my knowledge, I know that, for example, the prayers or this verbal rituals or what have you are very known, for example, in the Indian tradition, right? That you can maybe like help some moments with specific recitation or something like that. But what happens with the different talismans with the different types of materials? Like, I mean, how much do they expire? That's my question. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so it's a very interesting question, and there are several opinions on this, but I will try to represent what I have read in the traditional texts and also based on my experience. So the traditional texts very much focus on making talismans out of metal or out of precious or semi-precious stones related to that planet. And this is very important because sometimes I think people who come from the modern tradition, there is a tendency to want to improvise. But it's very important that people understand that because it's thought of as the rays of this particular planet, the invisible ray of power is particularly well suited to a material of that planet, right? So you don't want to mix and match. This is very important. And again, a traditional, magician would never want to do mixing and matching. But in more, and I think once people start using paper more widely, so as you get more into the medieval and Renaissance era, paper becomes more available, than in 1,000 years ago. You definitely start seeing paper talismans as well. And the general advice that you see is that materials that are very slow to be formed, so metals which take, maybe millions of years to be created, and stones which take, also a very long time to be created, those will hold that magical essence indefinitely, forever, basically, much longer than your lifetime. And so it's an interesting experience when you ever go to a museum and you see like what you can recognize as an astrological talisman, and you just sit there and you're like, this is still working, like you wonder what influence it's still having, right? Even though it's maybe hundreds or even thousands of years old in some case. But you can certainly also do paper. And in my experience, paper works for several months very well. So it depends on what kind of goal you have, right? If it's something like a long-term goal, like I want to become wealthy, which, that would be a multi-year process, you should probably use like a stone or metal. But if it's something more short-term, like I just want to find a better paying job, paper is just fine because it shouldn't take too long. Yeah.
So, for example, with my Jupiter talisman that I made in tin, it's going to last for all my life. Do you have to reactivate it or something? No.
You shouldn't have to, no. And I've always wondered, like, that usually I've noticed is like almost the #1 question by students, which is fine. But in traditional texts, this is never mentioned. And I always wonder if it's because we are so used to having like cell phones and electronics. This idea that things have to be recharged on a regular basis is so common to us, whereas somebody 100 or 200 years ago would never think of it that way because electricity is just not a part of their life in that way. But yeah, you shouldn't have to. You certainly can if you wanted to, like once a month or something, if on the day and hour of Jupiter, on a Thursday, if you wanted to do a special ritual with your talisman, you certainly could, but it shouldn't be required in order for it to keep working for you.
Great.
Can you pass it on?
I think you should. Yeah, you should put it,
I did.
You can pass it to your children.
I did. Yeah. I asked Nina when Camila, my daughter, was going to apply for a visa in France. And I asked her, can I give my talisman? And she said, yes, give it to her. And she was the last one that was approved before the pandemic arrived and she went to Europe. So, oh, wow.
It's working for her too.
Yes.
I have another question. What happens with morals and the production of talismans, right? Because we are talking about maybe helping a child or becoming wealthy, right, on your own terms, I mean. But what happens if you have, or if you are interested in making like magic with maybe the malefic planets or for not so, let's say, pure intentions? What
purposes
happens there?
Yeah. So this is very interesting, Melina, and I can talk about this for a long time. So just stop me when you get tired of it. But it's there's a recent translation of the Picatrix that's very interesting. It's a scholarly translation, and Priscilla will know it because it was required for our class. So I believe she has a copy. And this translation is what the authors did in the introduction is they added up all of the purposes. They categorized the different spells, So it was very interesting because they found that a huge percentage of the spells in the Picatrix are actually negative for other people. Like there are just as many spells to make yourselves rich as there are to, harm your neighbors in some way. It really gives you a picture of the human condition, I think. And what's interesting is that certainly Picatrix does not really give you any kind of moral guidance to say, oh, you shouldn't do this or bad things will happen. They very matter-of-factly say, yeah, if you want to kill your neighbor's cow, here's what you do. And it's almost amoral in that way. However, the caveat I have to that is that with magic, and this has been something I've observed for myself as well as other people whose magical careers I have watched, is that if you do a lot of, or if you do a significant amount of malefic magic to harm other people or cause problems for others, it tends to cause problems primarily for the magician. It's not, and I don't think it's so much because there is like a god who's like punishing you or anything like that. Obviously, I don't know, but that's my impression. I think it's more that when you are doing magic, you are using yourself as the instrument to bring the magic into the world. You are part of the experience. And so whatever you're doing is going to impact you and change you to some extent. And that is, I think, the biggest risk. It's that you are slowly transforming yourself into a certain kind of person. And you can make this work for you if you're doing, very positive, constructive magic, but you can also have it work against you. And I have seen some very negative effects that people have had who do this, who do kind of, negative magic with others. I would like to talk a little bit about the malefics as well, because I think that's an interesting topic. So as Priscilla knows, I don't have any problem with creating talismans for Mars or Saturn, provided that Mars and Saturn are appropriately strengthened, right? There are times in our lives when we may need them for something, right? There might be times when you need that Mars influence or that Saturn influence, and it can be used positively. And in fact, Picatrix is, which I should actually define, it's a medieval grimoire of magic that comes from the time of the Arab period of Spain, essentially. So it's probably like 9th century. But anyway, Picatrix says that a wise magician uses these planets like a doctor uses poison, right? Very wisely and in small quantities. They have a role and they can be very helpful. They just have to be used the right way. And I've noticed that what happens is with the malefics, they can work for us, but they will work a little differently than benefic planets. They won't just give you everything you want. It may be, there may be some struggle or some conflict associated with it because of the nature of these planets. So what sometimes happens is people will make, especially like new students, they get all excited and they start making Mars talismans, and then they're surprised if they have some negative effects in addition to the ones they want. And that is simply the way that the malefics work, right? It tends to be a reflection, I think, of the fact that we have not correctly integrated their energies into our lives, right? Very few of us are completely 100% comfortable with our own Mars and Saturn. And until we are, those talismans are going to bring some level of discomfort, even if they bring, the desired effect.
We made well, I did one talisman, remember, because I had vampires in the in my country.
Vampire bats.
Yes, and we prepared a Mars talisman, which I didn't use because I was not going in that time to the country, to the farm.
To the farm.
And
sure.
So it was like, be careful with that talisman, no?
I also think
Exactly.
that something, I was reorganizing things and see how cleverly everything is connected, right? Because I was ordering some things in my library, right? And I came across some notes that I had made for an exam, right? Again, 20 years ago, right, for university.
Yeah.
And I was reading some things from the Barbour Institute, and they were talking about alchemy, right? Not magic per se, but related. And some professors there, what they were saying is that when you're looking for the philosopher's stone, right, in reality, it's not you're trying to make gold. What you are doing is some kind of mystic experience, right? I'm not going religious here, but I think that there is something related to talismans or to talisman making that is something, I'm going to call it sacred, but not necessarily related to God, right? But we are dealing with very big powers, right? So that's why I would be wary to make at first at least, right? To make a Mars talisman, Saturn talisman, I would feel much more comfortable working with the good planets, right? And in that sense, traditional astrology, as you said, is so straightforward. There are good things and bad things, and that is not necessarily like, personally, I feel like comforted, right, by the fact that there is kind of a simpler kind of order, right? And I think that it's a very good thing that we have that to work with magic, right? Even though maybe if you have bats or vampires or whatever, it's good to have something to repel them, right? And of course, you're not going to repel bad influences with Venus, right? But still, I think it's like bigger than ourselves. I don't know.
I think that you made a good point, Melina, because during Nina's course, I felt the thing that was so sacred. I was feeling like, wow, and having a lot of respect afterwards about when you say new moon intentions, and then say, well, be careful, because rituals really are not like do it yourself and do it this time, and it doesn't matter when you are doing something, no, or what are you asking, or so I think that it for me it was a different. It changed my mind considering a lot of things, and I think that we are like in a sacred space now, doing all the rituals, the dressing like the planet, and waiting for the hour exact, negotiating with the colors, and everything was so sacred for me. And it was so, well, I am a Scorpio moon, so imagine that for me was something that was beautiful.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah.
How many, I mean, with which frequency can you make talismans? Imagine, I know that we don't have like magical elections, yes, like your newsletter, right?
Yeah.
We don't have the sky available for us at all times, right? But is there a because like what you say, when we are making the talisman, when we are making this ritual, we kind of mediums or channels, right? Somehow, right? So
yes,
can you make, I don't know, an indefinite number of, can you perform an indefinite number of rituals, or can you build an indefinite number of talismans, or you should be like careful with that for your own sake? I mean,
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. I don't know too many people who do, so it's a little hard for me to say, I know this person who did it and here's what happened. Part of the reason is that if you want to take it seriously, it takes some effort and preparation, so it'll be hard to do it all the time. But theoretically, I don't think there's necessarily a problem with that. And I'll tell you why, Melina, and I'll go back to your earlier comment about the sacredness of this. And I think it's a very important observation. So what tends to happen is, we only talk about astrological magic as a very utilitarian kind of practice. I have a desire and I do this thing and it's going to bring it about. However, if you go back to, for example, the Neoplatonists, and so the Neoplatonists are, they're the late Platonic, I would say, adherents of the Platonic philosophy. So the ones that we often tend to talk about are like Iamblichus, and there are others as well. But they were very interested in sacred ritual of the planets. And of course, this ritual, because it has to do with the planets, it has to be astrologically timed. And for them, because they were philosophers, they would never say, I'm a magician. I think they would be like really offended if you called them magicians. They saw themselves as the lovers of wisdom. And for them, in order to become a better person, in order to evolve spiritually, to achieve enlightenment, you would probably do a lot of ritual in order to align yourself with the planets. And I think that I am almost certain when I read Iamblichus's book, which is called On the Mysteries, I highly recommend it, by the way. If you read that book, you realize that there is a very strong emphasis on prayer and ritual. So it tells me they probably did this a lot. Now, again, they maybe were not producing talismans like we are. In fact, I would say most likely they were not. But maybe they went to, the temple of Aphrodite on one day, and then the temple of Zeus on another day, and that they would do these rituals in order to maintain that presence of the sacred and to place themselves in the divine presence, I would say probably on a very regular basis, right? And so one of the first thing that I teach in my class, in my magical elections class, is knowing, of course, the days of the week and the magical planetary hours. Because if you know that, then you could do rituals every day, right? You could do a ritual for Venus on Friday and Saturn and Saturday and so on. Not necessarily to ask for things, but in order for you to improve that part of your personality and part of your soul, which resonates to Venus and to Saturn. And through this, you become, a higher level person. You become a more spiritual being. So for this, I think you could do it all the time. I think doing lots of talismans for worldly goods, I think over time would probably become very chaotic, but I don't necessarily think it's bad. I think it would be hard to keep it up simply.
You don't have a lot of dates also to do talismans. That's, I think,
No.
I remember looking for Venus talismans, and we had to go 2 years from that time on because Venus was going to be with Saturn, and it was going, well, it's not so easy. And I remember you saying you have to plan 10 years ahead the times that you need to find different dates.
Yes.
And
no, Nina, I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
No, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say it's important to be selective. That's all I was going to say. Yeah.
And how long does it take a talisman to work, for example?
It's hard to say. I have seen them work very quickly. My personal experience has been that they tend to work very rapidly, often within a few weeks to a month, but it depends on your goal. Again, if you have like a very long-term goal, again, my example is becoming a wealthy person. If you're just like average, right? It could happen overnight, but that's very rare. More likely it would take some years and maybe even decades for different events to come into place to gradually, say, build your wealth, right? So that talisman might take a lifetime to really fully come to its realization, even though it's helping you at every step of the way. If your talisman is for something more short term, let's say like you have a talisman to get a visa to France or something, that could happen very quickly. You shouldn't have to wait for a very, very long time for that to come about if the election was done correctly and, if everything was done okay.
Do you take into account outer planets or you stop at Saturn?
I do not take them into account, but it doesn't mean that, as I tell my students, you certainly are welcome to, right? I just teach it because I think it's very overwhelming already to just use the 7, but you can certainly incorporate them. The thing I would caution anybody watching this to incorporate the outer planets is they tend to act as malefic planets for the most part. And so now you've suddenly gone from 2 malefic planets to worry about to 5. And so it actually can really decrease the number of elections that are available to you that a traditional astrologer might consider okay.
No, because I was thinking about being wealthy and I was thinking about cryptocurrency, and I thought maybe like now with Uranus in Taurus, maybe it would be overall like, well, now we have the square with Saturn, right? But imagine we did.
Sure, in general, yeah.
Exactly. In general, I thought maybe it would be kind of a good election or I don't know, maybe a good period, right? To think about becoming wealthy, not Uranian way.
Yeah. That's very interesting, Melina. I don't think about it, but that's because I don't, I tend not to use the outer planets so much, but why not, right? It absolutely seems to have some kind of correlation. So why not try to take advantage? Yeah.
We have to do experiments.
Yes. Exactly.
And have a statistic.
Students, astrological magic is an experimental art. It's like alchemy, Melina, right? Without the laboratory, but it's exactly like that. Like your life is the laboratory, right? And you experiment. Yeah, it's the problem. Yes.
Yeah.
Two questions I have. One is about alchemy. So remember me to go back to this. And the other one is, do you think that if you do for example, a talisman for being more wealthy, that talisman can overcome your natal promise?
That is the number one question as far as I'm concerned, Priscilla, right? How much can a talisman, as you say, overcome the natal chart, right? If somebody has a chart that's really bad for wealth or anything else, how much can the talisman help you? And my experience has been that, with a natal chart, it's very rare that the chart will tell you exactly, you will only ever make so much money per year and never more. There's always a range, right? So the chart may say, yeah, you're going to be kind of average, but average is a range. There is higher average and lower average. And in a life that can make a big difference, right? Between being comfortable and financially unstable. It's a very small amount of money. So what I think talismans do is they help you get to the higher end of the range indicated by your natal chart. Now, where that ranges can vary, of course, based on the natal horoscope. But I do think that they can help maximize the potential that maybe you are not currently able to, get the best for whatever reason. Now, if, for example, somebody wants to be happily married and they have this really afflicted, seventh house and Venus and I don't know what else, what might happen is the talisman brings you the relationships, but maybe the talisman can't make them stick, right? That is harder, I think, to do. And so I think the talisman will do its best given your chart. But again, recognizing, just as you say, there are some built-in limitations based on that person's nativity.
Okay. Also, I think that if we have a bad transit, for example, a Saturn transit, we can talk, negotiate with Saturn in some way so that he is not so bad for us in a transit.
Yeah, I think that's right. And this is something that I strongly recommend for everyone. Not so much making Saturn talismans, right? But working, for example, on the Saturn's day and hour every week, not to produce a talisman, but just to do like a small ritual, a small prayer, in order to create a better relationship with that planet as an ongoing basis. I always say it's like visiting your grandmother or visiting a neighbor, right? You would build a relationship. You wouldn't go to them and say, I want this thing, but you sort of very gradually, very casually, maintain a long-term kind of repeated approach to the planet. And I have found that it's very helpful when you see, oh, I have a bad Saturn or Mars transit coming up, is start working with that planet in a ritual way, in a small way, every week. And it seems to help a lot because they're now approaching you as a friend rather than as a stranger.
Right. That's good news.
It is
And
good news.
do you think that, what do you think about oils, or do you think we need to know alchemy, the traditional alchemy, without considering astrology?
Yeah, it's very interesting to me, Priscilla. I think that traditional alchemy seems to consider astrology, but they do it in a very hidden way. So I don't claim to, have a full understanding of how they do it exactly. But I think that you can certainly make remedies and so on under astrological configurations. And if you read herbal manuals from, say, the 16th century, they will frequently tell you that this is a solar herb, and so it should be picked in the hour of the sun only for maximum effect. So you can do all of those things, absolutely. It's become more, I think, trendy to make things like oils and so on. But there's no reason you could not do that for your own benefit. Now, of course, the oil might not have the same lasting effect as a metal talisman, but it can be a very nice addition to your overall kind of planetary strategy.
Okay, thank you.
Imagine, so I have my talisman, right? So
Yeah.
how do I use it? Imagine I was able to make a stone or precious stone or a metal kind of talisman, right? What do I do with it? Like, do I hang it in my house? Do I wear it? Do I use a ring? Or I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Melina. So there are a lot of different approaches, and I don't think there's one exact answer. I have found that honestly, just having a talisman around the house is absolutely sufficient. It can be visible. It does not have to be visible. If you want to put it away somewhere, it does not matter. However, there are many traditional books that are really, they focus on like making rings, planetary rings, and they love this idea. I can just see like the Renaissance people with like, 40 rings on their fingers, right? But that's also partly the fashion of the times. So you could do that. There isn't one right or wrong way. I like the idea of having the talisman in the place that you want to be influenced. So if it's a work talisman, maybe you put it in your office, but I don't think that's even necessary. It's kind of more of a nice to have. Once the planetary energy has been sort of sealed in the talisman, it's going to impact your life. Doesn't matter really where you put it.
Oh.
And what es espectacular. Like,
I love it. I love it.
So what kind of skills do I have to make this talisman? Because imagine that I've been through the astrological part, right? I've chosen my election, I've chosen my moment, right? So I am wearing my Jupiter clothes or whatever planet, right, I'm looking for. And like, because like I imagine, do I have to be, I don't know, a smith? How do I actually make it, right? What skills do I need? Or do I write something on a piece of paper? But imagine I want to go, I don't know, the full way and make it in metal, right?
That's a good question.
Yes.
Yes. Like, do I have to be an artist?
Yeah, no. So the number one thing to remember is talismans don't have to be attractive to function. And this has been a blessing in my personal practice. So, and especially if you look at, talismans that have been found, like casual talismans, not like works of art, they're often terrible looking. It looks like a 3-year-old made it, and that's often what it will look like if you're trying to engrave on a piece of metal, but that's okay. Like, just do your best. Don't worry about it, just get a metal engraver, maybe practice a little bit before the ritual and do your best. It really does not matter what it looks like. Obviously, if you want it to be like a visual piece of jewelry, then what I've seen people do is they commission jewelers to make it for them. And there are some jewelers who are astrological magicians, or at least are aware of astrological magic, who will do it at the right time and so on and so forth.
Like Tony.
But in general, if you're making it, like Tony, yeah, exactly. But in general, it's, you don't need any kind of special skill. Only, if you want to please yourself, then yes, you will need more artistic skills.
What I did, because I am the worst person in Earth, on Earth, drawing. So what I did is with my husband, he was doing the talisman while we were doing all the ceremony.
Yes, yeah.
I think I would just have to stick to
I see. Yeah, I do too. Most of the time, Melina, I do as well. And it's okay. It's sufficient. It's not a problem. Exactly. And if you're very worried, like if you want it to look good, before the ceremony, you could trace the image, on it, and then you could go over it during the ritual in a more permanent way. So there are lots of things. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
I did that, yes. What do you think is the difference between an amulet and a talisman?
Yeah, so as I understand it, amulets are like more natural objects, right? Like if you find a stone that has a natural hole in it, for example, that's considered to be an amulet. Whereas a talisman you manufacture. And I don't think that amulets really are used in astrological magic because the material has to be impacted in some way in order for you to get that celestial influence into it. So a natural stone that you just pick up from the earth could become a talisman, right? But all by itself, it was formed over millions of years. It was not made at a particular time. So it's a little different. Yeah.
Okay, so can you tell us, because we know that Priscilla had a good ride with her Jupiter talisman, right? Can you tell us like talismans that went wrong, or like a bad story about making talismans?
Yeah.
Magic?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of the first talismans I did is I made it for a friend. And it wasn't particularly good. It was supposed to be a solar talisman for vitality. And I think I made it, I'm trying to remember, but the sun was definitely not in Aries and definitely not in Leo. It was, I think it was like the middle of winter. It wasn't like sun in Aquarius, but I'm like, sun in Sagittarius, that's okay, right? The sun is in its triplicity. Well, the problem is that I made this talisman, and immediately the friend that I made it for got like a really bad cold that like could not be explained. So after about 2 days of this, I realized that, maybe I should take this a little more seriously. And I went and I like buried the talisman at a crossroads, But so that's probably like the worst thing that I ever did. And after that, I started being a lot more careful. I realized that, having the planet in its own triplicity or other minor dignities was not sufficient. It really has to be in its sign or its exaltation. So, you live and learn. So,
and how do you get rid of a bad talisman?
Yeah, well, it depends what it is. If it's paper, you just burn it.
Yes.
This particular one, I made it in metal. And so this one, I buried it at a crossroads, which is one way. It's not the only way, but it's one way that you can kind of disperse its energy. And it worked instantly. It worked within, I think, like a few hours or something to, stop this weird like cold. But you could also like put it in the ocean or put it in a river or something like that.
So you don't reverse it with the new talisman. You have to get rid of it.
No. You just get rid of it. Yeah.
And did you have a strange or an experience, some kind of experience with a talisman that you want to share?
I've had lots of really interesting ones. Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, so probably the most dramatic one was, and I've shared this story before, and I like to share it because it's so interesting, is I made a Mercury talisman. It was Mercury in Gemini, and I made that talisman some years ago, maybe about a decade ago. And what was very interesting is that I made this talisman. I lived at the time in a location that was extremely rural. So when you looked outside, there was like fields for miles. You just looked and there is just nothing, like there's just nothing. And what was interesting is that because it was Mercury in Gemini, of course, this talisman had to be made in the spring, right? And it was, I think I made it was like May or early June, very warm normally. And I made this talisman at dawn when Mercury was just on the horizon, right? And as I'm doing, and I did a very complicated ritual. I called on, very specific angels and archangels. Like it was a real, there was a lot of juice sort of in this ritual. So what ended up happening is I'm doing this ritual, and the temperature inside the room, I had the windows open, is very normal. It's starting to warm up. The sun hasn't come up yet. And just as I started invoking the angels, the temperature in the room dropped so dramatically. I mean, we use Fahrenheit here. So I think it dropped in about probably 20 or 30 degrees in 5 minutes. It's impossible, but you could see your breath as I was speaking these words. Suddenly, like, it was extremely freezing. And so this lasted for approximately 5 to 10 minutes. And there was also a sensation. It wasn't like physical cold because it was cold, but it was like kind of like this feeling of pins and needles, kind of. It's more internal than surface. And so I didn't have any like visual. I can't claim I saw any angels or anything like this, but it was by far the strangest experience I had making a talisman. And I wasn't scared. In fact, I felt positive about it. It felt good. But this talisman ended up being extremely powerful for me. And it ended up, it really, how should I say this? It felt like since that time, my magical abilities went up like several 100%. It was very strange. It's not exactly what I asked for. I just asked more generally for like knowledge and wisdom and things like that. But it really seemed to have done something in a very particular way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are talismans always individual? I mean, maybe it's my 11th house son, right, that is asking, but like, can you make a talisman for a group or for maybe a couple, I'm thinking, right? Or you do it always for yourself?
No, you can make it for other people, absolutely.
For other people, but for one individual, I mean.
Not necessarily. I think you could do it for a group. The Picatrix mostly has negative talismans, but there are talismans to destroy a city. So that's definitely for a group, right?
Yeah,
but you could do the same. Yeah, sure. But still something positive, right? If you wanted to make a talisman to help a group or help a family or help a neighborhood, you could absolutely do it. And then probably, you would be directed to bury the talisman in the location where the group lives or where they meet or something like that.
Do you have to have a special permission for the people
to do it for a group?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think so. I mean, it depends what you're doing. I think if it's generally positive, it's okay. But if you think there is something here that could be harmful, then maybe it's not such a good idea to do it.
Yeah. Because I was thinking,
but I think I know.
Because, for example, I tend to do, I wouldn't say a lot, but I work with electional astrology. And for example, I don't know, a few weeks ago, I made this chart for a marriage, right, for a wedding. And I thought, I don't know if maybe you could complement that service of an electional chart also with a talisman, right, for the couple or for maybe a business or something like that. Because
Of
they,
course.
I mean, of course, you don't, like, they go well together. I mean, they pair well, or no?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes. And
yeah, you certainly could. The only challenge is you might not have the right timing.
yeah.
And you know, like if they want to get, you know what I mean, it has to happen at the right
Absolutely.
time. But
no,
yeah.
it could be something else that like an extra thing that you can give to your client, or
that's right. Yeah.
It's not, it's maybe a good idea.
Yeah.
And I forgot what was I going to ask? So where would you recommend someone that is just starting in magical astrology, right? Where, I mean, maybe an author, or where, or maybe, for example, going straight to the Picatrix, it's kind of hostile, right? Because it's because of the language, etc. But
no, and it's heavy
in a
to
lot
read
of ways.
Picatrix.
It's actually hostile. Yeah.
Yes,
without a guide.
Yes, it's basically impossible, right? So we're not, I'm not thinking about recommending primary sources, right, to anyone, right, because they tend to be hostile, and as you say, no, they tell you how to kill your enemy and that type of stuff, right? But where do I start, right? I want to start making talismans, right? Where do I start? Who do I start reading?
Yeah.
Taking a course with Nina.
Apart from taking your course, of course. Yes.
I know. And it's a little difficult, partly because, of course, I know your audience, you know, are Spanish speakers, so I don't know what's available in Spanish versus translations into English or anything like that, or English sources. But it's a little bit difficult to say. The number one thing I would suggest is maybe before the person even starts getting into astrological magic is get good at electional astrology, right? Because if you can do that, that's probably like 75% of the work, if not more. Because unless your chart is good, your talisman is not going to do much for you, right? Exactly. So I would almost say become really proficient at electional astrology using traditional principles. And of course, there are schools that can do that. You could also do it even through books. Now, I do tend to suggest like primary sources when it comes to traditional astrology, right? I always tell people, well, read Christian Astrology by William Lilly. I don't know how practical that is, but the truth is, if you really embrace those principles, you will be able to assess what is a good electional chart versus a bad one. And I don't know of a very good modern source for elections. I know, for example, and this is something, again, that's probably more specialized, but like Ben Dykes' translations. You know, he's, for people who don't know, he's a translator of ancient texts into English. I don't know if any of his works exist in other languages, but maybe.
No.
So there's
one. I don't.
Not in Spanish, but
that's too bad. Yeah, but he has one book called Choices and Inceptions, right? And so this book teaches you, if you want to do X with electional astrology, here's how you do it. And if you went through this book and you learned it and you studied all the examples and you did all of this stuff, it's excellent, because you are, at the end of it, you will know the principles of electional astrology, which again take you to very close to astrological magic.
Then the thing that you're
but really just read the Picatrix. Yeah.
So like, once I'm proficient with electional, then I have to go through the ritualistic part, right? That would be the thing that would be missing, and what about the rituals, right? Can I make my own ritual, or like using these principles of maybe the planetary influences or the colors or the materials, or like, do I have to repeat, I don't know, a prayer or whatever, right? Or can I make my own?
Yeah, so you certainly don't have to repeat a specific prayer. I know a lot of people, including myself, though, we really like the Orphic hymns, which again, for people who are not, I know you're probably familiar, and I know Priscilla knows it. but it's basically a collection of prayers that were composed in the Hellenic world about 2,000 years ago. So they're not super ancient, but they're pretty old. And they were probably used in some kind of initiatory, like secret rituals, you know, like Bacchic mysteries, that kind of stuff. And each of these prayers or poems is to a particular god or goddess, including some fairly minor ones, not just the planetary ones, but you know, there are several dozen of them, and they're to a bunch of gods and goddesses, many of which you may not even know. And so you can use these Orphic hymns in your ritual. So if you're doing, you know, a Venus talisman, you can recite the hymn to Aphrodite, for example.
I think that
another source that sorry.
No,
let me just finish my one thought, Priscilla. Yeah. Another source that is good, but it's also in English. And so unfortunately, I don't know how to recommend a Spanish one. There's an author called Stephen Skinner, and he writes a lot on very ancient magic. He's kind of like a researcher and compiler. And he has a very interesting book called, I want to say it's something like Principles of Greco-Egyptian Magic. And this is a magic as it was practiced during the era of the Greek dominance of Egypt. So from the period of the invasion of Alexander until, you know, around like 2,000 years ago. So it's kind of the end of the Egyptian world, but its rituals are still intermixed with this Hellenic gods and so on. Anyway, it's a very interesting book because he tells you what are the pieces of these key rituals. And because a lot of planetary ritual seems to have originated around this time, it's a very useful book to help you learn to structure your own rituals. So it's not a primary source, but it draws heavily on them.
Can you repeat the name of the book?
Yes, I can give it to you exactly. I think it's something like Principles of Greco-Egyptian Magic.
Okay.
Yes, it's called, Techniques of Greco-Egyptian Magic.
Okay.
And the last name of the author is Skinner, S-K-I-N-N-E-R.
Okay. You know, I think, Melina, that the thing is concerning your own ritual is that you have to align with the vibrational energy of the planet. So that means the colors, the materials, the fumigations, I think that that's the key to enter the same
wavelength.
Yes.
That in a way it's the same like problem or challenge that you have with electional astrology in general, right? So I get a chart, and now what do I do with the chart, right? Maybe if you are electing for a wedding, it's more simple, right? Or it sounds as if it was more simple. But if I'm opening my business, or I don't know, or other type of elections, right? Sometimes you don't know what is it that you have to do at that particular time. And in most cases, or for example, what I recommend my clients is that they figure out what would be the beginning of something in their own terms, right? But it's good to have this at least this basis or tools, right, to draw on, even if later on you develop your own ritual, because as Priscilla says, eventually you have to be aligned with this kind of planetary, I don't know, nature, right, that you have been speaking about since we began the talk. Because in the end, if you are, for example, performing small rituals or small invocations or small prayers for, I don't know, bad planets, right, to make them more friendly or something like that, then that's the thing that you're looking for, no? Some kind of connection, some kind of I don't know, link, no?
Yeah, exactly, Melina, exactly. And I think I'll tell you a secret. It's not exactly a secret, but it's kind of a secret. You know, because when you are doing planetary ritual, you are aligning yourself with the gods, right? And the gods, by definition, are much more powerful than humans, right? They are eternal or close to eternal. And of course, we are temporal. And therefore, we cannot tell them what to do. Right? We cannot command them, bring me wealth or bring me something else. The only thing that we really can do is we can ask. But what we are really doing is, you can think of us as tuning ourselves as like a radio to a particular frequency. And in doing this ritual, you know, as Priscilla was saying, in having all the right materials, maybe the right music, right? Every planet is associated with a certain tone, with a certain sound. Having all of the right elements allows us to elevate ourselves to their level. It's not so much that we're telling them, okay, now you're going to give me this and this. It doesn't work that way, right? So I think when you recognize that that's what we're doing, I think it becomes easier to understand the overall approach.
I wanted to ask you, with this, I wouldn't say revival, but it looks as if there is a revival of traditional astrology, maybe in the last, 10 years, right? What has happened with magic? Do you see the same type of revival in terms of people trying to practice magic or trying to learn magic and etc.? Because maybe 20 years ago, when
I think so.
With traditional astrology, it wasn't as common. I wouldn't say common, maybe it's a word, you understand, but now, traditional astrology seems to be more familiar, right? Or seems to be more available for the general public, or for people that are even starting with astrology. What do you think that what's the place of magic in this revival of traditional astrology?
Yeah, I think that magic, just as you say, alongside with traditional astrology, astrological magic has also enjoyed a level of popularity and interest. I think that astrological magic, for one, we didn't used to have, at least in English, so many sources available, right? A lot of things have only been available for 10 years or so. But part of it is too, at least in places like the United States, in the 1980s, we had something called the Satanic Panic. And it was this thing, and maybe you had this, I don't know, also in Latin America, but there was this real thing where, there are these satanic cults. It was like a mass hysteria, really. I don't know what else to call it, where people thought, there are these satanic cults everywhere and they are doing dark rituals and they are abusing children. And this became like this huge kind of media sensation for some period of years. But then over the years, as people started researching this and talking to the people who made these claims, it was never substantiated. It was simply, it's hysteria. It's like witch hunting, They might believe it in their heads at the time, but like there is no fact. And so I think in the 80s and 90s, I think this actually helped to kind of depress interest among astrologers in things like astrological magic, because it sounds a little bit too close to, satanic ritual, even though of course it's nothing of the sort. So I think some time had to pass and some traditional sources had to become available in order for people to give it a second look and gain maybe a little bit wider acceptance.
So still in progress, you would say?
I think that
still in progress.
I want to see what's going to happen with Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces with all this.
Me too. What do you think, Priscilla? Tell us if you have your ideas.
I think that it's going to be like an opening to this world, massive, opening, not massive, but more. We are going to hear a lot more. We are going to have like some kind of opening, intuition, all kind of things, no? I think that it's going to happen that. I think that Jupiter and I think that Freud was the one who was born with Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces.
Really? That's so interesting, Priscilla. I did not know that.
Because I was doing research when I did my Jupiter in Pisces video, and I was looking for when was this when happened Jupiter the last time, and it was when Freud was born, and I think, wow, incredible. So I think we are going to have, and when Jupiter and Neptune were together, not in, it was in Pisces, and then when we have Jupiter in Pisces also another time, we have, for example, films like The Origin, it was all dreams. We have another one that was very Titanic, for example. That was
water.
no, so incredible. So I think everything is aligning, The more I go into this world, the more I see that everything is aligned. So I think that next year we are going to see a lot of these things.
It's a good thing that we have Saturn in Aquarius, right, to help us structure things right, and to make it more like I wouldn't, maybe serious is not the word that I'm looking for, right, but make it more contained, right, and make and it makes it more organized, and I think it's a good thing, right, because
also
intuition is like you go overboard with intuition, and one of the problems that we astrologers have is that sometimes we're not taken seriously, right? Most of the times, right? So I really like it that we have Saturn to support there, no? In Aquarius.
I think that this Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces also will bring a lot of addictions and a lot of other things, huh? We're going to see both sides of the coin.
Yes, but you know, Jupiter, at least it's in Pisces, and it's going to fly through Pisces. It's going to go very fast. Let's see.
Till May 10th next year, till 28th of October, it will be Jupiter in Aries, and then it will go again back to Pisces till the 20th of December.
Priscilla, the human calendar.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Priscilla, I just need to call you and ask. I don't even need to go look at my books.
She's an ephemeris. Yes, she's a walking ephemeris, right?
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yes. But, you know, I do wonder, I have noticed, I will tell you something interesting, that with Jupiter in Pisces, just even in the last, you know, we had it there for what, 2.5 months, right? Just coming to the end of this period this year, there has been so much interest in astrological magic, just in a very subjective way. People contacting me. I mean, there's always a fair amount of interest, and over time it's been increasing. But the last 2 months with this Jupiter, especially on the star Fomalhaut, which is of course at 3 degrees of Pisces, it's a very magical fixed star, and it represents the mouth of the fish. Jupiter is stationed on this fixed star. And I am really wondering if, as you say, it, for some people at least, it opened some awareness or interest of this area. I think that's exactly correct. The Fomalhaut too is important. I always like to talk about it because it represents the shamanic experience, for lack of a better term. It is the mouth of the fish. And we have, of course, the most famous biblical story is, you know, relating to this is Jonah in the mouth of the whale. He goes inside the whale, he comes out, and he is like this holy, saintly, transformed person, right? Which is a completely shamanic experience. Of course, it's not positioned that way, but that is what it is, right? If you look at like the shamans of Siberia or of Latin America or different locations, there's always this transformative experience, often to do with animals. You see also this in like Native American myth in North America, right? And you come out and you're a different person, you have abilities. And so I think there's this particular star with Jupiter stationing on there is exactly right. I think it is going to start opening a greater awareness. And, you know, the people born now, maybe 50 years from now, when they're, you know, like in their height of their careers, they might bring something really amazing into the world magically.
So you're also using fixed stars.
Yes, she uses a lot of fixed stars.
It's very complex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It can be. It can be, but it doesn't have to be.
No. Personally, for example, for electional, I only use them when I can't find any other thing that is more simple, right?
Yes.
You know, sometimes the sky is so complicated and so. Yes. Sometimes, you know, what we were saying earlier, we were talking with Priscilla about something that like an election for a trip, right? And
my trip.
Yes. So I was saying, okay, you know, just put the MC in 29 degrees. So see if you can, you know, but we didn't think about fixed stars. Maybe we can use them, no?
I'm going to the US. I'm going to the US, Nina. And I was figuring out, because the day I'm going is so bad, that I was saying when I'm going to close the door and leave home. Yes, it's August the 1st, and it's so difficult that day. Saturn opposing the Sun, Mercury Saturn opposing Mercury.
A Taurus moon, so with Uranus, pero bueno, maybe we can find some fixed star to help.
Exactly. I always say put something on Spica if you can.
Yeah, that's difficult. Also, I want to know, because when you are doing, as the same happens with elections, is that you don't have the perfect chart. You don't have the perfect chart to do when you do a talisman. No. So how do you recommend to do when you have the right placement, the right planet, like Jupiter in Sagittarius or in Pisces, but you don't have the best chart? You have to negotiate, not negotiate. You have to say, okay, you have to put the malefics in that place, the moon and all that, no?
Exactly, Priscilla. And that's, I think sometimes when people are beginners in this, and maybe you saw this with other students too in the class, you start seeing that people are willing to overlook some pretty serious problems in order to get the talisman. Yeah. And that's okay. It's, here's the thing, it's part of the learning process, right? I always say, like, make your talisman. If you're not 100% sure, if there's something there that you're not happy about, make your talisman in paper and then just watch it very carefully. If you have problems, just burn it, at the first hint of problems. Don't get too attached to it. I always feel like with talismans, we have a little bit of flexibility, right? We can wait, at least theoretically, we can wait. With an election for a wedding, maybe you can't wait 2 years, right? But with a talisman, you're in control. And so I think you should exercise that control.
Thank you. Well, I don't know, Meli, if you have another question for Nina. I can spend all my day with you, Nina.
Yes.
But I want to first to tell all the people that is listening here, where can they find you, and where to tell your Instagram and all the things so that they can reach you, because a lot of people know English also, so they can reach you. And then we would like to have you maybe to talk about climate. I am so passionate about that. You know that I am waiting your course.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So sure. So people who want to find me, I guess I should have mentioned this at the beginning to introduce myself, but I do publish a monthly guide to magical elections. So to know what's coming up to make your talismans, so for every month you can purchase it. You can go to ninagryphon.com. I also have a Patreon, so you can go to patreon.com/NinaGryphon, and you can subscribe to it there. And what this guide is, it's not just times and dates, but I wanted to do it like for somebody who, pulling all this material from different sources is really intimidating, I think. And so it has the information like, okay, here's the election. Here are like the angels and the spirits that you need to call on. Here are the recommended materials. Here is the image that you should create. Just try to give you everything you need to create the talisman. My philosophy is the talisman that you yourself make is the most powerful one versus buying it, for example. Yes. There's just no comparison. It's like making your homemade food versus something, at a restaurant, right? It's just not the same, right? And so I think that's something to remember. And then also I'm on Instagram under Nina Gryphon and Twitter and, all of the social media that you
can. And we'll write everything down in the description box so they can find you also. So, well, Nina, it was a pleasure for us to have you, a honor, really. And thank you very, very much for all your knowledge and to share it with us.
Yes.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I will translate, or I will put the subtitles, and I will put it on YouTube.
Yes.
Yeah, please, and send me the link.
I will also share Nina.
When it's ready.
Of course, Nina. Yeah. Of course.
I know.
Of course.
Okay. Muchas gracias.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a nice week.
Thank you. You too.